Okay, and we're live now. Kerry, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Oh, no worries. Happy to be here.
Okay, so let's take it from the top then. You are the managing partner of ReBoot Consulting. So tell us what ReBoot Consulting is and what your role there as managing partner is.
Sure, I'm actually managing partner and founder. So
And
Reboot
founder. Okay.
is and founder, yeah, which sounds like a lot, but I'm also chief cook and bottle washer. So we'll round it out like that.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, that's how I describe myself. Reboot is brand and business consulting group. We typically work with clients at a crossroads. So those are clients who've really hit a revenue ceiling and are trying to understand what the way forward looks like. So it's a little bit of growth strategies, a little bit of brand strategy, and sometimes it's new market development strategy, kind of all rolled up into one.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. We'll jump back to that in a bit, but you're
Mhm.
born in Toronto, but you were raised in Thunder Bay. So let's start first with how did you make your way to Thunder Bay from Toronto?
Oh, so my parents met in Toronto. My mom's originally from Thunder Bay. And if you know anything about the Bay, you know that before 1970, it was two cities called Fort William and Port Arthur. They didn't amalgamate till 1970. So my mom was raised just outside of Thunder Bay in a little municipality called South Meeting. She came to Toronto to go work at Wellesley Hospital, and she met my dad while she was in Toronto. So, interesting story. My father came to Canada to play professional soccer in the United States. So, he came from Belfast, Northern Ireland, and he moved to Toronto because he could not get an entrance visa into the US. So, he played for a professional team out of Buffalo. So, he worked in Toronto, and he actually commuted 3 times a week and on weekends to Buffalo. Can you imagine that on the QEW three
Jesus,
times a week?
that's a hell of a commute. Although I imagine traffic was a little bit better back then.
Yeah, I can imagine it is. So the story of my parents meeting is actually quite interesting. So my mom worked at Wellesley Hospital in the lab there, and my father worked for the Toronto City of Toronto Waterworks. And I guess the story goes, my father was in a trench in front of Wellesley, and one morning he forgot to put the "Don't fall in the trench" sign up, and my mother fell in the trench.
It's
No
awesome.
kidding. Yeah, and she landed on my dad. She thankfully didn't break anything, but she badly bruised his collarbone. And so they admitted him into Wellesley Hospital, and my mom went to see him because she felt so bad, and that's how they met. I'm not kidding. That's actually how my parents met. Yeah.
You talk about how
So,
times have changed because like negligence leads to like true love, whereas now this would have led
no
to a
kidding.
lawsuit.
Exactly. So, yeah. So they met, and I guess my mom took my dad up on the train to Thunder Bay, Fort William, to meet her parents, my grandparents. And my father really loved Thunder Bay, small city. And, but of course, they were both working in Toronto. So after I was born, I think they decided, we don't have any family here. My dad's family was in Ireland, in Belfast, and part of them were in New York State, Buffalo, but they didn't have any family here. So I think they thought, you know what? It's actually a good idea for us to move. So my grandfather worked at the paper mill in Thunder Bay and said to my dad, I can get you a job, no problem. So they took 18-month-old me and they moved from Toronto to Thunder Bay. So that's where I was raised.
Tell us what life was like growing up in Thunder Bay for you.
Idyllic. So I had that classic small city, small town upbringing. What was interesting about Thunder Bay, it's right at the head of the Great Lakes. So it's, you know, 16 hours from Toronto, but it's also very close to the US. So it's about, I don't know, 60 miles from the Minnesota Ontario border. And, but it was idyllic. So I grew up, skiing and curling and playing outdoor sports in the winter, and then in the summertime was beautiful. Short summer, very cold, but small town. You went out the door in the morning. In the summer, my parents used to send us out the door, and there were lots of kids in the neighborhood, and they would say, "Go outside, come home to the street lamps, come on." And that, it's interesting. That actually does happen um, in a small city, and so it was great. My grandparents lived out in the country. They lived on 20 acres. So I spent a lot of time outside of the city and a lot of time doing outdoor activities, and it really was idyllic. It was great.
Speaking of athletics, you mentioned that you were a skier and that you were also a curler. Very Canadian. All you have to do is like throw hockey and lacrosse in there, and then I mean, all quarters. That's I
Yeah,
guess that's what Canadians should be playing, all four of those sports. But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you were also a nationally ranked track and field star, as just a track star. How did you find your way
Woohoo!
into track? What was your event?
Oh, so interesting. I ran 100 and 200 meters, so I was a sprinter. From a very young age, I was fast. I think I inherited my dad's speed, and he was very fast on the soccer field. And I must have inherited that because from a very young age, I remember winning, all the races at the school track meets. And when I was in grade 9 in high school, I was participating in the local city high school track meet. And there happened to be a coach who was from Thunder Bay who was coaching at Arizona State in Tempe, Arizona. He was there just visiting, and he watched me run 100 meters, and I just blew away the competition. Like 50, I left them in the dust 50 meters. And so he approached my dad and asked if if I had actually ever trained. And my father said, no, she just enters races. She likes to run. And he said, she's talented. She's really talented. And if you're interested, I'm going to be here for the summer. I'll coach her. She can join it was the Thunder Bay Olympic Club then. She can join the TBOC. And I think she's got true talent. And that's how I got into it. And so my father talked to me and he said, what do you want to do? Are you interested? And I said, yeah, of course. I think that's way cool. So I started training. I was a bantam champion at 14, so a Canadian ranked sprinter at 14, and I just went from there. But as you can imagine, I grew up in a time where we had dirt tracks. I trained on a dirt track for the better part of the year, and then we traveled. I traveled to track meets. I had a great coach, and he spent a lot of time with me, and a great club. The club was very supportive, so they sent me to track meets. I went to the 76 Olympics, and I
Oh,
competed at
nice.
yeah. I went not as a part of the Canadian Olympic team, but there was a auxiliary track meet there that was for juniors. It was a Canadian juniors, and it was an invitation only meet. And I went to the 76 Olympics and then a ton of track camps. So I came up in track when track in Canada was a powerhouse. So Ben Johnson, Angela Taylor, Angela Bailey, Desai Williams. So those names aren't going to mean anything to you, but it was
Ben Johnson. Oh,
yeah,
I know Ben Johnson. Yep, I remember
yeah,
that one.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I actually trained with Ben, and and it was interesting to come up in track at that time because Canada was just doing so well. Yeah, it was interesting. I learned at a really young age how to get inside your head, how to be disciplined. I trained 50 weeks a year, 2 hours a day at the track. And in the summertime, a lot of times we did 3 days a week, 2 workouts a day. So 6 a.m. in the morning before we go to work, and then again at 5 to 7 at the track at night. So it was a tough slog. You do it because you want to win. You have that competitive spirit.
What does like a typical workout look like for a track athlete? Because again, and excuse my ignorance, I'm picturing just a
That's
lot of
okay.
running.
No, actually, interestingly enough, so I was a sprinter. So the thing about sprinters is the two areas that you want to focus in on your start. So a lot of block work, and you want to work on your fast twitch muscles, which means a lot of weightlifting, a lot of exercises. So there's a specialized group of sprint exercises. They were developed by a German sprint coach called Gerard Mock, and they're called the mock exercises, and they break down a sprinter's stride, and then he's developed an exercise for each piece of that stride. So, tons and tons of short burst work, so we never really ran a lot of endurance, but I did a ton of stairs and a ton of hills.
Mhm.
And yeah, so it's really, really tough. It's tough training. And then a lot of time in the weight room. I looked like a little Mack truck when I was like 16 years old.
Really? So you spent a lot of time in the weight room? Because I thought maybe they would have been doing everything
Mhm.
possible to kind of keep your weight down.
No,
No.
no, tons and tons. And I could get into physiology, but I won't. But yeah, so your fast twitch muscles in a sprinter are really critical. So you want to make sure you have, uh, there's, your muscles are made up of something called sarcomeres, and sprinters have a greater capacity for building sarcomeres. So you want to make sure you bulk up those sarcomeres, and that's your fast twitch muscles. So if anyone's listening who's like a doctor or something, don't quote me on that, but it's kind of high level, the basics of it.
I'm surprised that your influences, though, growing up weren't athletes and that apart from your grandparents, we'll get into that in a
Mm.
second, a lot of them were authors.
Yeah, you know what? I had no interest in sports. My family was a hockey family. Both my brothers played junior A hockey. My parents were hockey crazy. Um, and I hated hockey. Still hate hockey. Don't I'm saying, did I say that out loud? Hate hockey. We had one TV in my house growing up, and on Saturday night and during the playoffs, it was constantly on hockey. So I hated hockey, but no, none of my influences growing up were athletic at all. No sports figures at all. Didn't know them.
And
Didn't care.
why authors like Margaret O'Mitchell, I've got them down here, Carolyn Keene, uh,
Yeah.
Maud Montgomery. I guess you must have done a lot of reading then growing up when you weren't training for track.
Yeah, so in my early years, I read voraciously. Starting at about 4 or 5 years old, my mom actually got so worried about the amount of time I spent reading that I remember she took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, "No, she needs to go outside more. Like she shouldn't be reading as much as she's reading." But I would escape into my bedroom and I would read all the time, and so the power of a story to take you away or to take me away was so powerful. I would disappear and I would read an entire book in one day, even at 8, 9, 10 years old. I mean, I started reading really, really complex books at a young age because I just tore through all the books. I tore through books so fast. So for me, the library was my favorite place to go. When I got into track, I continued to read more as a way to get into my head and just calm myself. But I've always been a reader. I've always had 3, 4 books on the go all the time. So, which is an interesting dichotomy, huh? Sprinter, reader, kind of weird.
Can't
But anyway,
I can only read one book at a time. But you know what was really funny about your mother taking to the doctor and asking for assistance? It's and saying no, she needs to go outside. It's almost like parents today when they're like, my kid's always on the phone. What am I supposed to do? It's almost like there's that
yeah,
parallel where they were treating it like,
yeah,
oh my God, she's reading again, which is now people
yeah.
want them to put their phones down and start reading a book.
No, I know it's a bizarre thing. So, but I come from a family of readers. My grandparents, particularly my grandfather, my parents, big readers. So, yeah, reading is just baked into my DNA, I think.
And your grandfather and your grandmother. So explain why your grandparents were also influences for you.
So I grew up in a house that was 800 square feet, and there were 5 of us, one bathroom, 5 of us, and so it was a small house, and it was a kind of a frenetic house, always busy, people coming and going. My I have 2 brothers, 2 younger brothers. One of my brothers was they call us Dutch Irish twins. I was born on March 19th. My brother was born a year later on March 17th. What my mother is thinking, I don't know, but so very close in age. So my poor mother, I think, was just like overwhelmed. Traditional family. My dad worked, my mom stayed home, um, and so my grandparents. I think, recognized that I probably needed uh, another space to go to right from an early age. So my mom was a bit overwhelmed. She was a very young mother. She had me when she was 22, which is young. And so they spent a ton of time with me. I'm the oldest grandchild, or I was the oldest grandchild. And yeah, so they would come pick me up. They would take me out to the country. My grandmother taught me how to sew and bake and birdwatch. And yeah, she was a real Renaissance woman. And then my grandfather was such a positive influence. He always encouraged uh, debate and discussion. And even at a young age, I was allowed a seat at the table as long as I was willing to engage in discussion that was informed. So, I would read a lot, and then I would, Sunday dinners were a big conversation time in my family at my grandparents. And so my grandparents was kind of the center of my family life growing up, which was really interesting and sort of real cornerstone for me growing up. So, yeah, they were amazing.
Let's take your first 2 jobs and break them into 2 categories. We'll call the
Mm.
first one, the one that doesn't get reported to the tax man, and the one that did. So the first one, you're a babysitter.
Yeah,
Call that,
yeah,
and I like the branding you have. You called it Mother's Little Helper. I don't know if you were just telling me
yeah.
that when we were doing our pre-recording research, or was that a brand that you put out there at a young age?
No,
Mother's Little Helper.
well, you know what? That's what people, that's what 12-year-olds were called then. So a lot of my friends did the same thing. They took summer jobs as mother's little helper. And because when I was starting to babysit, which was a good way to make some money, at 12, I took the babysitter course. It used to be a babysitter course. You could take the babysitter course and you become a certified babysitter. So it was offered at churches and schools and community centers. And then, so that qualified you to become a mother's little helper during the summer. Now, two things. First of all, the woman that I worked with lived next door to us. So my mom was next door all summer, and she had one little girl who knew me, was really comfortable with me. And she would have been about 3 or 4. So, for me, like all I had to do was go out the door, and if I needed my mom, she was next door. But I got paid for the summer, and that was my very first job. And I worked hard. It's hard chasing after a 3-year-old.
No, no, it's definitely. I don't have kids, but I have taught swimming lessons to 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, and yeah,
Mm,
no,
you know,
absolutely. I know all
hard
about
work.
that. It
Yeah.
is. So your next job, though, we'll call this one that the tax man probably knew about. You were a waitress at a golf and a country club,
Oh
and
yeah.
you were a summer camp counselor as well. Let's start first with the country
Hmm.
club.
Yeah.
First taste of hospitality. Did you enjoy it, and what did you learn about it?
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I worked there. I worked in the summer in the clubhouse lounge restaurant. And then in the winter and in the summer, I worked weddings and banquets.
Okay.
So I have never worked as hard in my life as I worked banquets. So it was really tough. Like that was real, like, 300 people working a wedding. So, everything that goes along. You set the table, you serve the food, you clear the plates, you wash the plates. And by the end of the evening, I would be like exhausted. I really earned my money there. When I worked at the clubhouse in the summer, I absolutely loved it because, and again, this is probably highly illegal. I would have been 16. I learned how to make a mean Tom Collins the first summer that I worked
Nice.
at that bar. Mean Tom Collins. And I used to serve alcohol all the time, even though at the time the drinking age was 18, I was not allowed to do that. I was not allowed to work in the bar, but it was a private club. So, and I learned this is terrible, but some nights were better than others for tips. Like there was like a Tuesday steak night. Um, and so for some weird reason, the guys that came to the steak night were way bigger tippers than, the regular just working in the bar. So I learned to choose my shifts and maximize my tips. It's kind of interesting. Now when I look back on it, I super enjoyed it. I didn't find it a grind. I found it actually really fun.
And you were also a camp counselor as well too.
Oh, I was a camp counselor. I would have been 17. Imagine this. You're 17 years old at Chippewa Day Camp. Chippewa Day Camp. When I say that, I get the Chippewa Day Camp song in my head. Because, of course, you spend all your time singing. I had 8-year-olds. So I'm 17. I have 8-year-olds, 10 of them. And you get them for 2 weeks. And, you do all kinds of camp things, crafts and swimming and hikes and all that stuff. The only training they gave us was what to do if you encountered a bear, which
Okay.
is,
That's
yeah,
important.
yeah, it's important. Okay, so if you encounter a bear, because they're black bears in Thunder Bay, lots of them, you're supposed to lie down and play dead. Don't run, don't scream, lie down. So we would go hiking and do bear drills with the kids. Imagine trying to get a whole bunch of 8-year-olds, 10 8-year-olds to like lie still. Anyway,
And you got to
and
imagine that
then
some of those kids would be memorized, like mesmerized by the bear. Some would get freaked,
mhm,
like get completely freaked out, but the others would be like, "Hey, there's a bear, like a giant teddy bear," and then that invites a whole new level of danger because of their curiosity.
exactly. And here's the thing: like, what are you supposed to do with a bunch with 10 8-year-olds if you get attacked by a bear? Like, it boggles the mind. Anyway, the good news is no bears, no even no bear sightings. Never had them. But then every 2-week block, you had a Wednesday night sleepover. Second Wednesday night sleepover, I had to set up the tent, make a snack, get all the kids to the privy to the outhouse, get them back, uh, and then the next morning, and then get them all to sleep. The next morning, build a fire, cook them breakfast, take down the tent, and get them back to camp. So a friend of mine who was a camp counselor, her and I paired up. Both of our boyfriends knew each other, so we get the boyfriends to come out. They would set up the tent. They would gather the firewood. We'd introduce them to the kids. So this is, so and so. They would play soccer with them because both these guys played soccer. It was brilliant, brilliant. It was it was really good orchestrating. And then they would leave, and then we'd get the kids settled. And then the next morning, we only had to build one fire. But the other thing that amazes me about that was I had to do the grocery shopping too. So they gave us like $30, and I had to actually go and get the groceries for the sleepover. Again, you'd never see that again. So all
No,
kinds of, fun things. One time I wasn't paying attention, and one of my groups, they nailed my shirt to the table. And just all kinds of stuff like that. Anyway,
that's awesome. Yeah, you can't have that kind of
yeah,
fun anymore.
no,
No,
definitely not. You
that
can't, but it was a great job.
you studied radio and television arts at Ryerson University, but before we
Mm,
jump into that, that was at the expense of the Arizona State scholarship because you brought it up earlier, but
yeah,
but
yeah,
that it looks like that scout came back. He didn't just say, "I'll be
yeah.
watching you, I'll be around for the summer." He wanted you to attend
He did.
Arizona State.
Yeah, yeah. So his name was Albion Connie, and he was the head coach of the women's sprint team at Arizona State at Tempe. And he offered me a full scholarship. He had kept in touch with my coach. They were good friends, and said, "Listen, I'm going to give her a full ride." I wanted to come down. It was, so I went. I went to Arizona State. I toured the university. And my coach, whose name was Glenn Foglin, he said to me, and he was really blunt. He said to me, "I'm going to tell you this, and I know you're not going to like it." But he said, "I don't think you should go to Arizona State because you're just not good enough." And
Wow.
that year, yeah, that year in '79, I had placed in the top 5 sprinters in Canada. So I placed fourth and fifth, fourth in the 100, fifth in the 200, which meant that had we gone to the Olympics in 1980, I likely would have gone to the Moscow Olympics. And then, of course,
Mm.
Canada boycotted. Russia invaded Afghanistan. All the G7 countries boycotted, and so they never named a team, and I never got to go. And that would have been my glory year. I would have made the 4x1 relay team. So, but my coach said to me, "You're not good enough. First of all, you're 2 inches too short. You need to move up to 400 meters because you're not fast enough. And my concern is that you're going to get to Arizona State and you're going to get injured. And then you're going to be in a situation where you have no education, you have no track career, and you will have set off on the wrong path in life. And so I talked to my parents about it, and my dad was great counsel, and he said to me, I think you need to listen to your coach. And it was a real pivotal moment. And I remember thinking, what if I made the wrong decision? What if I should have gone to Arizona State? But you know what? He was right. Like, he was absolutely right. I was 2 inches too short, and I did need to move up to 400 because as good as the Canadian sprint field was, the U.S. sprint teams were like nothing I'd ever seen. And I had been to a track camp when I was in grade 13, back when we had grade 13. Went
I
to
had it too. I know all about it.
yeah, grade 13. So spring break, March of my grade 13 year, went to a track camp at Penn State. Tennessee State had at the time the best women's sprint club in North America. They were renowned for spitting out NCAA champions, Olympic team members, and so we went down, like Ontario sprint team went down for a camp. And I remember watching the women, they had their own track. And I remember watching the women and thinking, wow, like, just wow. And that's what I would have been up against at Arizona State. And as good as I was in Canada, I wasn't good enough to move to that level. So I didn't. So I got accepted into Radio Television Arts, and I joined the U of T varsity team, the U of T varsity track team. Moved to Toronto.
You could do that even though you were at Ryerson?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So they took me on, and no problem. My coach recommended me to the sprint coach there, and they took me on, and so I joined the varsity team there. You didn't have to be and I trained at the U of T track at the it's like the varsity gym, like not varsity stadium, but the indoor track there.
Okay. And I guess that's the one near St. George subway station. That's my reference point. Near Bloor?
Yeah.
Just off Bloor?
No, that's varsity stadium. So you know where the field house is? The U of T field house? That's where the track is.
No reference. But okay.
Yeah.
Is it off Harvard?
Okay. Yeah. It is at the corner of Harvard and Spadina. Huge
that I know.
building. Harvard and Spadina.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know the pizza. I know the pizza place across the street. That's my reference point.
Yeah. You know what? And it's an astounding facility.
So why radio and television arts?
This all sounds like I really didn't do much planning in my life. So I was dating a guy in high school, and he was a year older than me, and I don't know why he decided he applied to Radio and Television Arts, RTA, at Ryerson, and he didn't get accepted. And I remember reading the curriculum overview and thinking, well, this is cool. I think I'd like this. So I applied and I got accepted.
Nice.
And yeah, it was interesting. And I remember doing my interview. I did it on the phone, and I remember thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to give it my best shot, and I got accepted. And the weird thing is, that's the only place I applied to in Canada. That's it.
Really?
If I didn't get accepted, I'm not sure what it would have done. Yeah. No idea.
And your first job after graduation? And your first job after graduation was with the Canadian Olympic Association. So you still found your way back into athletics. And what were you doing with the COA?
God. So we did a summer tour. We went to we started off in Winnipeg at Red River Days. So I was part of a traveling exhibition that went to fairs and exhibitions all the way across Canada that summer. And we were traveling with the official mascot, the Canadian Olympic Association official mascot to the '84 Olympics, part moose, part beaver. His name was Mumik the Mover. And so, I'm not kidding. So I don't know who created Moomik the Mover, but anyway, so we were sponsored by Jeep and Sears. So Jeep gave us a Jeep, like a beautiful new Jeep. Sears supplied all of our uniforms. Holiday Inn sponsored all of our travel, and we traveled with this Jeep and this 40-foot high-no truck, and we had an exhibit, and we went to all of the fairs and exhibitions. Started in Winnipeg, then went to Calgary, then went to Edmonton, then went to Vancouver, drove all the way back across the country, did Toronto, and then went to London. Um, and we put this huge booth up, and we sold Moomik the Mover clothing and souvenirs, and all the money went to the Canadian Olympic Association to help fund athletes' travel. Yeah,
Okay,
or
nice.
athlete training programs or something like that. And Moomik only lived that one summer, and so I was the advance. My colleague and I, there's four of us traveling. We were the advance team, and we set up all the press interviews, managed all the media, did all of the radio interviews, all that good stuff like that. So it was just, I can't believe that somebody actually gave a bunch of 22-year-olds, 23, yeah, 22-year-olds, this, brand new Jeep and this truck, and set us off across the country. Again, that would never happen again. But we had so much fun.
No, it wouldn't happen now. I'm pretty sure the lawyers would get involved.
No,
They treat it like one giant
yeah,
liability. Okay, so
literally.
your next job, we had a chance to talk about this a couple days ago when we first made contact. You moved to you've got to tell the story the same way you told it to me.
Oh
You
God.
end up in Saskatchewan, and
Yep.
what happens next?
So so I graduated in 1983. Okay, so that makes me old, officially old.
It does not make you old,
And
no. Makes you
yeah,
experienced.
the headline the week I graduated from Ryerson was 1983 worst year for university grads. We were in the middle of a recession. There were no jobs. So, getting this gig from from this Canadian Olympic Association was pretty amazing. So then I had to look for a full-time job. I worked as a tour guide at the CN Tower. I wrote continuity for multivision slide presentations, and I did a couple shows for Today's Special. I wrote a couple scripts. So I did a lot of piece work. And then I got a job with a production company as a broadcast producer out in Saskatchewan, a company called Visual Horizons. I move out there 6 weeks after I move out there. I get an apartment, a car, I'm moving with a roommate. And all of a sudden, I'm in studio and we're shooting footage for a client. And these guys arrive and they start taking all the equipment out of the studio. We're like, what is going on? Go to the office and we say to the head sales guy, like, what's going on? And he goes, I was just coming out to talk to you. The company's gone bankrupt. I'm like, are you kidding me? I just moved to Saskatchewan. So now I'm out of a job and we're going bankrupt. And so my cameraman, he leans over and he says to me, meet me in the parking lot. And I said, okay. He was a year younger than me, already married, and he had a child. He was 21. But I think in Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon, that was the norm at the time. Anyway, we go in the parking lot. He has a truck. He lifts up the lid of his truck and he said to me, I've got all the tapes, all the raw footage for this air seeder documentary that we were supposed to start cutting. Now, an air seeder is one of those big, huge machines that forces seeds into the ground. Don't forget, this is Saskatoon. They grow wheat. Anyway, he's like, I have all the footage. And he said, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to the owner and we're going to tell him, look, it's a $40,000 project and you need it cut because you need the money and we'll cut it, but you're going to pay us up front for it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? He goes, nope, that's what we're going to do. I'm like, okay, I'm with you because I don't have anything to lose. So we did. We went in. The guy who owned the company owned a bunch of businesses he didn't really work at Visual Horizons. He was like had a commercial real estate company. Anyway, we go to his office, we park ourselves there, wait till he comes back, and we tell him, we'll cut this, you're going to pay us up front, and we'll deliver it in 2 weeks. And of course, he knows we have him over a barrel. We have the footage. He needs his cut, he needs the money. So he goes, okay. He pays us a lot of money at the time. We drive to Regina, and we work midnight to 6 a.m. or midnight to 8 a.m. for like 3 or 4 days solid because I already written the script. We were ready to go. We were ready to cut it. Went in studio. The only time we could get studio time in Regina was during the off hours. So we cut from midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning, and then for 3 or 4 nights, we lived in a motel room. And then we got this cut and we delivered it, and that was the only way that I actually could stay out in Saskatchewan. I could stay in Saskatoon because I had no money. I spent all my money moving, and I remember thinking, oh, okay, this is a learning experience. So, and then I got a job shortly after that. So I got another job in Saskatoon shortly after that. So it turned out
S-
well.
Speaking of it being a learning experience, seeing someone that shrewd in action, and I'm speaking as someone who learns by example more than anything else,
Mm.
did that
Mm-hmm.
empower you to start being shrewd in your life? Like, did you look at yourself and go, I had no idea this is the way people do business? And did it give you the
Exactly.
confidence to be like that in your future
Exactly.
dealings?
Yeah. 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 I remember thinking, you know what? It's every man for himself. No one else is going to look up or is going to look out for me. I need to look out for me. It doesn't mean you have to be nasty or mean or anything, but I need to look out for me. And I need to, yeah, I need to put a line, to draw a line in the sand. And I need to say, this is what I need. This is what I want. So, it's mutually beneficial. And that's what I learned then.
You learn firsthand what leverage looks like and what it's like to use it. Like, that was
Yeah.
perfect. Oh, you
Yeah.
tell that story so well, I just want to say.
Thank you.
So, your move to CP Hotels, though, this is completely different than what you'd been doing before, and you're now the supervisor of advertising and public relations. And what did that entail, and how
Yeah.
did that differ? Was there a bit of an adjustment period uh, getting into that compared to some of the other media and marketing jobs you'd had before?
Yeah. So the interesting thing was what preceded my move to CP was I moved from Saskatoon to Houston, Texas.
Geez, okay.
So yeah, so there was a 2-year period. So I'm in Saskatoon and I do a lot of work with the Ministry of Tourism, Saskatchewan Ministry of Tourism. And I get a call one day from the minister's office and they say, listen, we have this film crew coming up. They're on their way up to do a fly-in fishing show, and they're overnighting in Saskatoon. I need you to take care of them. This happened a lot. And I said, fabulous. We have horse racing is on at the Prairie Land exhibition. I'll take them for dinner. We'll go horse racing. They might want to get some pickup shots. I'm thinking, okay, this will be good. I can get some publicity for the exhibition. So interestingly enough, the field producer who was supposed to be on that job, she'd broken her leg. So the owner of the company called Travel View International was there, and I took her out to dinner, set the cameraman up. They were doing harness racing, so off they went. And Holly and I started talking, and she said to me halfway through dinner, she said, I want you to come work with me in Houston. And I was like, what? She's like, I want you to come work with me in Houston. And she said, we are desperately staffing up. They had just taken a contract to produce all the material for the Travel Channel, which was fledgling. Didn't have any material, but Travel View had been producing travel documentaries for about 4 or 5 years, and they were staffing up. And she said, you'd make a great field producer. I was working in marketing at the exhibition. So anyway, and she said, and you're Canadian and you can get into countries where Americans are not so welcome. Cuba would be an example.
Okay.
Anyway,
Oh,
yeah. And I said, I don't think so. I have a great job here. I'm going to get promoted. I was dating a guy. I was like, So anyway, she said, we're going to keep in touch. So about 2 months later, she came back to me and said, just come to Houston. Like, just come and visit me in Houston, see the studio, meet some of the team. And I said, okay, what the hell? The relationship wasn't going that well. It's hot, cold, hot, cold. I think I was thinking at the time, there's only 3 people in the marketing group. My boss, who was the VP marketing, he's not going anywhere. So I got my promotion. It wasn't that great. So I thought, maybe I'll move to Houston. So I went to Houston for a weekend, stayed with Holly and John. They were the owners of the company. And I went to the studio, and you know what? I thought, this sounds amazing. So I did. So I got a 2-year work visa, which you could get at the time. And I moved from Saskatoon to Houston, moved my Dean, and I produced 13 shows for the Travel Channel. I started in Puerto Rico. and I ended up with on a yacht chartering show from Ankara, Turkey, and everything in between. I lived in Australia for 6 months. We shot 3 shows. I was a field producer, writer, but I did all the marketing for Travel View also. And I started. There were 52 titles when I started, and there was like 90 titles when I ended up. That's how many crews we had on the road. The editing studio worked 24/7. All young. Imagine this: a whole bunch of 24-year-olds, 25-year-olds from all over the world, based in Houston, but traveling all the time. It was the most fun job because I got to travel. I went on a Concorde. I got to do aerials over Sydney Harbor Bridge. We got treated spectacularly everywhere because we were an American film crew shooting for the Travel Channel. So, a lot of people at that age do the I'm going to sleep on the floor of a train kind of travel, live in a hostel. I traveled business class and I lived in the most amazing hotels around the world. So I kind of thought I'm going to do this differently because I don't do well on the floor of a train. So, so I was in Australia and we were shooting a series called Eight Great Golf Courses. Went to the Australian Open in Melbourne. I was with Greg Norman, who was really, really big at that point. Greg Norman was hosting that show, and I got approached by a gentleman who introduced himself. He was a senior VP marketing at CP Hotels, and his name was Kevin Power. He gave me his card, and he said, "If you ever come back to Canada, I will make a place for you." We had got to talking, we had a drink, and so my visa ran out about 6 months later, and I thought, I don't want to stay in the U.S. I don't become I don't want to get a green card. So I came back to Toronto, and I took my little self down to one university, got the job, and that's how I ended up at CP. So I managed advertising and PR because I'd been working on both those areas, and so it was a really busy job. So I visited every CP hotel there was, and they had hotels in Germany and Bermuda and Barbados at the time. CP Air was a part of the group. So it was extremely interesting. I wrote their crisis and issues management plan. I managed all the crisis situations, and I did all the advertising for the hotels, all of it, which was a lot. One person. We were a small department, and I traveled a ton. And I started going to major trade shows like ITB in Berlin, World Travel Mart in London, and I got deep into the hotel tourism space, which I had been in for 2 years, so it was really comfortable for me. It was a great job.
Between those last 2 jobs, all the traveling you did that ever get exhausting, or did you it seems like you enjoyed living out of a suitcase.
Always, always, and I will tell you, it got even more intense as the years went on. But we can get to that. But yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. I am so comfortable in hotels. I'm like the original road warrior. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
So what brought you then to Promenade Communications, and what did your role as their director of communications entail?
So I got headhunted from CP to Promenade by a really big salary bump. So Promenade was a really large integrated marketing agency, big client list. They were looking for someone to start a PR division. They had just acquired Renaissance Hotels as a client, and so they headhunted me, and they dropped a ton of money on my lap. And I thought, okay, let's go to agency land. And so I did. I was there 6 years. I built the division. Um, and what was really interesting about that was the client work I got to do was really interesting. I did a mixture of government. We had Minister of Tourism, Ministry of Tourism. We had Ministry of Economic Development and Trade, and then a lot of CPG clients I worked on. And then I worked on some B2B clients. So I did everything. And when I started, there was just me, and when I ended, I think there were 11 or 12 in the department. So that was great in a very large agency, a 200-person agency. So they were, they were a force back then, and I was there for 6 years, 5 or 6 years.
Did any of those categories outside of tourism surprise you? Like, because going into it, like to work on a tourism
True,
client or a tourism board in general, there's a lot of excitement around that even before you know what the full assignment is. And sometimes
true.
it's not necessarily as exciting as, no offense to any CPG companies, as to what they're doing, but were you surprised by some of the other brands or other categories you got to work on?
Yeah, actually, I was. You know, at Canon Canada was a big client of ours at Promenade, and I thought, how exciting could it be to sell photocopiers and cameras and stuff like that? But I have to tell you, they were a client at the time that absolutely loved sponsorship. So we sponsored golf. So we sponsored tennis. So ATP level tennis, you know, kind of CPG, golf. Um, and so because they had big budgets and we could sponsor a lot of sporting events, that for me was like super fun. We did a great event one year. Uh, AJ Casson was still alive, and he was one of the group of seven. He was the last remaining group of seven painter alive. And I remember going to see him. We actually, to launch the first ever color copier into Canada, he gave us permission to do a color copy, photocopy of one of his classic works. And so the launch
Really?
event we did, yeah, it was amazing. And the launch event we did at the AGO, and this is all Canon. Like they're a photocopier camera company, but they were the most interesting client because they just had, they were like, bring it on, get creative. And so I was allowed to get really creative with them. So yeah, and I got a chance to work with AJ Casson, which was at the time he was in his 90s. He died about a year and a half after I worked with him. He was really an amazing man. So yeah.
That event at the Rum, I wanna ask you a question about it. This is before social media, so when you put an event
Mm.
together, how do you how did you judge success back then, and how did you was there any way to make it go, and I hate using this term, I'll do it in air quotes, viral or anything like that? Because
Viral.
nowadays you put on an
Yeah.
event, you invite influencers, you throw it up on a bunch of social
Mhm.
media pages, and then hopefully the algorithm picks it up and they run
Mhm.
away with it, and then there's sales, attention, and everyone pats themselves on the back. But when you were doing it prior to social media, again, what did success look like?
Lots and lots of column inches, lots of earned media. So journalists, you know, you pitched them. We had all kinds of imaginative media events. We did media round tables. We did one-on-one interviews. We did radio shows. We did television shows, and lots and lots and lots of what I call column inches. So earned media. And all of that earned media would be evaluated and there would be a dollar amount put on it. And so you're looking for a return on investment. So say I put $40,000 into a campaign at that time, you better get $400,000 worth of press. So you better get a 10x on your involvement. So the more media you got, and this was earned media, the more that's how much of a success. And there were ways to actually bump that up or boost that. So if you get a stringer working on something and they sell it to every newspaper in Canada, we put it on the wire, look at where the pickup was. Like media monitoring then was really, really critical to the success of a campaign. And so if you got a lot of earned media, then we deemed it a success. And in Canon's case, uh, our campaign, now that also had an advertising component, but our campaign for color copiers, we sold out of the entire inventory of color copiers for Canada within 6 weeks of the
No
launch.
better no better success marker than sales,
Yeah,
especially if you sell out.
yeah. Client was exceptionally happy, and so they just kept giving us more and more business. So they had big budgets. There were big budgets back then. I mean, remember, this is when we're a time when a client would spend a million and a half on a television commercial.
Yeah, they don't do that
Yeah,
anymore.
don't do that anymore. I mean, it was a big production, and so they spent money on marketing. Like it was really interesting. It was an interesting time.
And you seem to have caught the agency bug because your next role was DB Communications, and you were a partner. Does that also mean you were a founder as well?
Yeah. So I was 33 when I started my first business, and I started with a partner. I always joke. My partner's name was Dan Bobby. It was DBA Communications. I was the A. I always say I was the A. He was the DB. He was about 9 years older than me. He was the former president of Continental PIR, which was the largest PR agency in Canada at the time, and he had a lot of international clients. He was looking for a younger female partner. He understood that that's what he needed. We got introduced through a mutual colleague, and we went to lunch. I liked him. I was looking to move from Promenade. I thought, you know what? I'm bored. I need a new adventure. And so we went to lunch. He said, "What do you think?" I said, "Yeah." I. He's like, "Oh, this is what we'll do. This will be the equity split." And we were 10 years in business together. We grew it from two of us in a shared desk in a shared space to, so we had 17 consultants when I left 10 years later. And that's where I started to travel. 60% of our clients were international, a lot of them in the Caribbean. We worked with government of the Bahamas, financial services sector. We worked with the Bahamas Stock Exchange, worked with Cayman Island Bankers Association. We worked with BVI Finance, BVI Government. We worked with Barbados International Business Development. Like, we worked a ton in the Caribbean. And so I was constantly traveling. I was constantly on the road. So we had offshore financial services division, and we had a tourism division. So we had Wines of South Africa Tourism, Jamaica Tourist Board, Minnesota Tourist Board. That was a fun one. Ice fishing and spam, the spam museum. That was going on in Minnesota. So we had those two divisions, which means we had a board in our office that actually showed where all of our consultants were at any given time, because they were traveling all the
Really?
time.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it was unbelievable. So my daughter was born in 1992, and I started my business in 93, and I was on the road 2 weeks out of every year for the entire 10 years that she was growing up. So thankfully, my first husband was he was a teacher. He was home. We had a housekeeper, a full time housekeeper, and we just kept things going. We had an agreement. This is what we're going to do, and so it gave me a lot of bandwidth to build my business. So I did. I did that for 10 years, and I like to say I grew up at DBA. Dan was a great mentor, later friend. And it was about 9 years into that where I said to him, "Look, we're not going to agree on this." I was in my early 40s. He was in his 50s, different stages of our career. I said, I want to be acquired, or I want to merge with someone, or I want to take on equity partners. And he did not want to do any of those things. So we parted company. He bought me out of my equity, and then I moved on. So it was I learned a lot in that about it's easy to get into a partnership agreement. It's not so easy to get out of one. So, lessons learned, mistakes I wouldn't make again.
Interesting. You never really hear about
Yeah.
that when partnerships like that end. You only ever hear about the startup part of it. And after you
Mhm.
had left, you'd moved to GJP Advertising. And is it safe to say that you were an employee there versus an equity partner or anything like that? Or
Yeah.
were you a partner in that?
Yeah.
So you moved from being
No.
basically one of the top dogs, like the company you owned, to
Mhm.
being someone else's employee. Was that a difficult, before we get into the details, was that a difficult transition for you?
No, because I was a gun for hire. So I was a consultant. So the good
Okay.
news is I was never on the payroll. I was a consultant there, and I knew the partners because they had tried to buy us. So I knew them really well. They wanted to buy DBA. I wanted to go there, and Dan didn't. And so I knew them. And as soon as they found out that I was leaving DBA, they called me up and said, "Look, we need a rebrand. We need someone to do new business development. What do you think? We need someone to manage some of our Caribbean business." They were expanding in the Caribbean. And I said, "Yeah." And I named a price, and they said, that'll work. So they paid me a really lovely sum every month. And I was a hired gun, and I didn't have to get involved in the crap that goes on with agencies. I came in, I did my job. It was fun. Um, well, I figured out what I wanted to do. Uh, and it's like getting a divorce, like leaving a business relationship after 10 years is like getting a divorce. All of a sudden you see this person for 10 years and you become really good friends. And then all of a sudden you don't have them in your life anymore. And that was hard. So GJP was and the partners were fun. Like, it was a fun place to work.
You said something I want to circle back on about a minute ago, that you did not have to worry about any of the other things that come with owning your own company. Can you can you touch on that a little bit more? Like, were there some administrative things
Sure.
that you just didn't want to deal with or you didn't like dealing with? Like, what was it that was unattractive about entrepreneurship in that specific situation?
Yeah, I mean, I was blessed because Dan really liked the operation side of it. But I will tell you, our early days, 3, 4 years in, it was a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of sleepless nights. It costs a lot of money to keep the doors open, and clients, as always, are slow in paying. It's tough to collect on receivables. It's it, there's just a lot of bills. There's a lot of balls to keep up in the air. You're responsible for people's mortgages when you hire them full time. A lot of paperwork. So thankfully, we had a good accountant, but it was, you know, my theory is that it's great if you're the one that can set policy, lead, make the decisions. But for me, if I wasn't going to be able to do that, I didn't want to be an employee. I didn't want to go back to being an employee. It would have been untenable. So that's why to be a hired gun was a just fine thing. But yeah, all of that stuff, all that day to day, train, keep the trains running, keep the doors open stuff it's hard. It's really, people don't, I think entrepreneurs don't really know what they're getting into, which is probably a good thing because no one would start a business if you knew what you're getting into.
The reason I ask is when I have entrepreneurs on the podcast, I try to get into some of the boring and mundane details that people don't
Mhm.
really think about,
Yeah.
like who told you where to go to register the company name? Like, if you were going to get a logo, did you actually sort it out to make sure it wasn't infringing on anything? And all the other stuff that happens in the background that if you don't make sure that side of your bed is tidy, that can come back to haunt you at
Oh,
some point legally.
oh yeah. Yeah. I've started 4 businesses. And every time I start one, I learn more and more and more about what it is to launch and scale a business. And all of that housekeeping has to be done. The foundation has to be solid. The operation side of the business has to be solid. Never mind, the business framework, the brand plan, the customer acquisition strategy and plan. It's the nitty gritty, paying your taxes,
Mm.
paying your payroll taxes, making sure you're registered, like all that stuff that happens. But then, it's interesting, and I say this to a lot of the clients I work with now. The leap between small E entrepreneur, which is what most people are, to a big B business, which is a legitimate, you know, business that's run like a business, is one that 80% of small E entrepreneurs never make. They just never make it because they're so busy chopping wood and trying to you know, keep ahead of the curve that they get this founder mindset that it's just really wonky, and so they'll never make the leap. I can tell you now, after talking to a potential client for half an hour, whether or not they're going to make that leap. So, you know,
Mm.
and it's interesting. But anyway, we're deviating.
No, no, we're not digressing at all. But let's jump to
Mhm.
level 5, though. Your next role, you're
Mhm.
VP, but you're also a senior advisor. So again, I get to
Mhm.
assume it was kind of the same format as the previous role. You were at the company, but could we call you a freelancer or a consultant?
A consultant. So all the 5 of us at level 5, we're all consultants except for David Kincaid, who was the founder, and that was the very early stages of the development of level 5. There were 5 of us, and we were all very, very senior, very accomplished, and looking to build a strategy firm. I got my certification in strategic planning during that time period. Learned a lot about strategy. We did $1 million strategy projects, big, big, big strategy projects. So it was a great learning curve for me. I went from execution to strategy. I had always done strategy, but I wanted to be pure strategy. And I was only there for a year, and I realized 2 things. One was that I missed working with clients because strategy is a very solo, solitary pursuit. I loved it, but I missed working with clients, and the environment was not what I wanted to be in long term. I'll be tactful. Um, it was, I just didn't feel like it was a good fit after a year. So I got headhunted for the job at Weber Shandwick. Actually had two opportunities to leave there, and I took the role at Weber Shandwick, the president's role, because I thought I want to work in the corner office. I want to own a balance sheet of a large multinational publicly traded agency. I want to work with big clients. And so I did. So I made the leap. And that was an interesting almost 5 years that I worked there.
Let's jump into that because you basically
Mm-hmm.
laid out what I was going to ask next is that you go
Mm-hmm.
from you go from entrepreneurship going to being a consultant and setting your own rate, and now it's like you said, you're running an established company, corner office, owning a balance sheet, P&L and L, and
Yeah.
everything else. So,
Yep.
let's start first. What does the president of Weber Shandwick do? Like, what does the day-to-day look like?
Ah,
Let's start with that.
oh, so it's mostly putting out fires. So I always joke that I spent more time with my CFO, who lived in Boston. His name was Mark Sullivan. Thank God he was like the nicest person on the planet. I spent more time with Mark than I did with anyone else. What you do is you put out fires, and I had four offices all across Canada. You visit the offices, you lead new business development, um, and you put out fires. Because when you work for a publicly traded multinational, you live quarter to quarter to quarter. Big on planning, big on looking at growth strategies. It's relentless. Your feet are to the fire all the time. You're either revising up or revising down. Every month, I would have like a 4 foot stack of invoices delivered to me by my controller, Julianne. She would put them on my desk, and I would have to go through every single one of them. And so you live
God.
by KPIs and metrics and who's running hot in terms of utilization and who's not. And where are we in terms of new business? What does the pipeline look like? Should I be concerned? Should I be revising down? Oh, we're having a good month. Maybe we could revise up. Like, it's constant. So you spend very little time with clients unless there's a crisis. And then you get parachuted in. Oh, we're going to bring the president. Or
Boy.
big pitches. Yeah, yeah. Big pitches. And, but I had four divisions. So I had corporate, consumer, healthcare, and tech. Four divisions, four offices across Canada. And so, and then I also had three conflict agencies that I was responsible for. So it wasn't just Weber. I had Goldman Harris, I had Current, and then I had a small experiential agency that we spun off when I was there. And then also sister agency in McLaren. So you're just like, you know, I was not allowed to turn off my phone for over 4 years. So part of my contract was even if I went on vacation, I had to be available.
Was that one of your first jobs where you had a cell phone? If I can ask you that? And I'm not trying to
No,
I'm not trying to
no,
date you that, but
no, it's a good question.
because like you were a senior level executive at a time when
Mhm.
it was payphones and landlines, and if they couldn't reach you, it was like, "Oh, Kerry must be in the air. Oh, Kerry must be out. We'll get her when she's back. We'll leave a voicemail or on her answering machine." And then all of a sudden you get to a point where we're talking like post pagers where they can get you whenever they want. Was that an adjustment period for you?
Well, no, here's the thing. I got my first cell phone at Promenade, and I
Okay.
kid you not, it was like massive. It was huge.
It
It
was
plugged
annoying to
into
carry
your.
around. Was it the
It
Zach
was
Morris we
huge. It
call the
came,
Zach Morris cell phone, like from Saved by
yeah,
the Bell, where you carried it
literally.
like
It
the
came
size of
in a
your forearm?
bag.
Oh,
Literally,
geez, I
it
know that
came
one.
in a
It's
bag.
and it's still got a cord,
Yeah,
right? Like it looks like the
yeah.
proton
And you
accelerator pack from Ghostbusters.
Yeah, it does. And you
Yep.
plugged it in the lighter. So you plugged it in the lighter, and that was your cell phone. So I got one of those at Promenade. So I was an early adopter. I remember getting my first computer, my first desktop computer was DOS based on my desk. I remember sending my first fax. I kid you not. Like, that's crazy when I think about that now, how far we've come. But yeah, that was my first cell phone. So no, so I always had cell phones, so flip phones and I had a BlackBerry when I was at Weber. We had Blackberries because it was, we were corporate and everybody in corporate had to have Blackberries. So I had a BlackBerry and, you got really good at it. So you were never not in touch with the office. Never not in touch. And I remember traveling with Dan when I was at DBA, and every hotel had a massive business center. And you'd go to the business center because you didn't travel. There were no really laptops. You didn't travel with a computer. So you went to the business center every day and you checked your email. You'd log into your AOL account and you checked your email. Kept in touch that way. Yeah. Which seems remarkable now. But at the time, it was like, ooh, can always get me.
So tell me about your move then from Weber Shandwick to CrossCap. How did that come about?
Ooh. Yeah, so that was interesting. So I wanted to go to New York and start a global brand strategy unit at Weber, and I'd always talk to my boss about it, and she said, "Yep, yep, 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 yep." And then 2008 hit, and that was
Mm.
a bad year, very stressful time to be leading an agency. 08, 09 were really tough. Canada was profitable because we didn't get hit as badly. No subprime mortgages, no asset-backed securities, so we didn't get hit as hard, but growth slowed. But the problem was in North America, the US just redlined. Like they just took a dive. Like I was one of the rare business units that was profitable. So of course, coming out of that into 09, 2010, I said, I still want to do this. And my boss was really honest with me. And she said, it's not going to happen. Like we are embargoed. We are not going to put any money into new ventures for at least 3-4 years. Like we need a really right size. There were tons of layoffs, tons of downsizing. And so I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I want to do something different, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Again, I got headhunted to this monster job. They doubled my salary to come on board as a CMO. This company needed someone to brand them, create the brand, move them to San Francisco. There was an opportunity to move to San Francisco, move the head office. They had mostly large American retail clients. And so I thought, okay, you know what? I did my time. I'm tired of sort of the publicly traded feet to the fire, quarter by quarter. So I left and I went to CrossCap for a year. And the deal was I'll come on board as a CMO for a year. Then the owner and CEO would retire. And then I would step into the CEO role and there would be equity. But I said, let's date for a year. There's a lot of work to be done. You don't have a brand. You didn't even have a website. Like they were really a bit Luddite for a software as a service company. Crazy. And so I did that for a year. And then I went back to the owner and CEO, who's privately held. And I said, okay, I'm ready. I've done a full analysis of your business model. It's not profitable. These are the things that need to happen. I had the CTO's backing. I said the business model is flawed for a whole bunch of reasons. And he said to me, I really like working with you. And I don't think I'm going to retire just yet. And I was like,
Ooh.
what? I'm like, what? And I'm in his office and I'm like, Craig, I have a written agreement with you that I'm stepping into the CEO chair in January. And he's like, yeah, aren't we a good team? You and me and Raheem was our
Oh
CTO.
my God.
Yeah,
Jeez. How did you
totally
keep your
reneged on it.
composure in that? How did you keep your composure in that meeting?
I just went numb. I went numb because I was like, are you kidding me? And at that point, I thought, you know what? I'm too old to bang my head against the wall. The business model needed revamping. My visa, my HB1 visa was well underway, moving to San Francisco, the whole 9 yards. And I thought, this needs to be resolved before I move to San Francisco because I'm not moving out there. And then he reneges on this. So he said, let me go. I'm going to go to Australia on vacation for a couple of weeks. When I come back, we'll talk. And I thought, okay, let him go. He came back. I wrote up my resignation letter just in case, and I put it in an envelope. I took it in with me in my books, and I said, okay, Craig, talk to me. And he said, I just really love the vibe we have going here. I love the energy. I love working with you and Raheem, and let's keep it going for another year, couple of years. And I got up and I slid my resignation letter across the desk and I said, sorry, Craig, but I came here to move into the CEO role. Um, and this doesn't work for me. So he opened up the letter and he read it and he said to me, you've got to be kidding me. I said, no, I was really clear. We have an agreement around this. And I thought, okay, just need to, you need to stay calm. And I said, I'm just going to leave this with you, thinking maybe he'll change his mind, but he didn't. And he didn't talk to me for 2 weeks.
My God, are you kidding me? What the
I'm
heck
not
is
kidding you.
Jesus? Sorry, not to use
That's
foul
okay. He
language or
didn't talk
anything,
to
but
me. Yeah. Yeah. Didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. Finally, I nailed him in the elevator at the end of the day. And I said, listen, I have 1 week left before I'm leaving. And you need to talk to me because there's so much coming up. There's nobody to, there's nobody to take on all these marketing pieces. We had trade shows and conferences and I was speaking and we were supposed to be in New York in 2 weeks at this major conference. Anyway, yeah, he said to me, well, I'm not happy with you. I'm mad at you and I'm not talking to you right now. And I said, okay, well, I have 1 week left. So if you're not going to talk to me, then let's wrap this up and, we'll call it a day. Nope, you're going to work to the end of your notice period and I'll see what I can do about talking to you. So I met with the CTO, who was a lovely guy, so smart. Would have loved to work with him. We keep in touch. And I gave Raheem everything. I said, here's the strategy and plan. Here's everything. Like it's all mapped out. Here's the next steps. It was a nice, neat package. And I said, Craig's not talking to me, so you're going to have to. So I gave him everything. And then at the end of that week, he came into my office and he said, I can't believe you're leaving. Like, I'm so mad at you. I don't think I can forgive you. And I said, okay. And I left.
you gotta love how he made it about you, even though you're the one that should be mad that he breached a contract he had with you.
He did. He did. And so at that point, I thought, okay, I'm done. I'm going to hang out my own shingle because I made so much money for Weber Shandwick when I was there. I was so profitable and my bonus did not reflect any of the work that I did at all. And I remember thinking, yeah, I think it's time for me to hang out a shingle because I really don't want to work for anybody anymore. So I did. Yeah.
Was that your first time leaving a job without having something else lined up? Because I noticed a pattern that I want to get into in a little bit is that you get headhunted
Mm.
quite a bit. Like your
Yeah.
next opportunity is usually presented to you, and then you get to make the decision as to whether or not you want to take it.
Yeah. The only time it didn't happen was when I left DBA because I wanted that to be clean. So I hadn't been talking to anybody else.
Okay.
And I left DBA, cleaned it all up. I took a couple of months and GJP then called me. We had hired a guy to sell the business. His name was Stefan Denis. He was an M&A guy. He did this a lot for agencies. And I think Stefan told the GJP partners, oh, she's because Dan turned them down. He said, yeah, no, I don't think it's a good fit. And I said to Dan, this is your last kick at the can. If you do not take them up on this offer, because I know they're going to come back, we need to, I can't do this anymore because I need to move on with my life. He knew that. And he did it anyway. He said, yeah, no, I don't want to do this. He was managing partner. This is that shareholder agreement again. He was managing partner. He had the final veto because he had more equity than me. And he vetoed it. So he called my bluff. And I said to him, okay, well, then we got to figure out how to exit me. And so I waited. So it was about 2 months in between. I needed that time to, kind of let my head settle. But it was weird because here I am after all these years. I have no business card. I don't know where I'm going. No, my identity was gone. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Who am I? I was a partner. I was this, I had all these definitions of who I was as a professional. Now I don't have them. And that 2 months was really, really instrumental in actually, letting me just be with all of that turmoil. I was in my early 40s. I was, yeah, it was a very difficult time to be rearranging the deck chairs. You're like, now what? So yeah, that was the only time I wasn't headhunted away from one job to another. I was lucky.
Your time at Smart Structuring, you were their CEO. So first off,
No,
did
I
you
was
get
the
headhunted for
CMO.
CMO
Oh,
of
sorry, Smart Structuring.
Smart
No, no, no.
Structuring?
Yeah, I
Yes,
was. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're the CEO.
No, Smart. Yeah, I was. Yeah, I started off as a CMO, and that Smart was a sidebar passion project.
Okay.
So I built. Yeah, I started ReBoot, and I built ReBoot, and about 2018, a longtime colleague of mine, a former client, we were in Barbados at a conference. We both sat on the board of this conference. It was a wealth structuring and wealth preservation conference in Barbados. And he said to me, I want to have a coffee with you or a drink. Like, I have a really interesting idea. And when he told me about the idea he had for smart structuring, because he's a trust lawyer, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. He said, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard of. And he said, well, listen, I think I can raise the initial seed funding, about 750,000 USD. What do you think? You want to come on board? It'll be a sidebar project. So did the ReBoot thing full time, and then did Smart on the side as a passion project. So we started in 2018. We raised a bunch of money. We debuted. Smart Structuring was ready to go out in beta in April of 2020. April of 2020.
Yep. Oh, I know what you're saying. April 2020. Everyone's got a story about how they were like on the cusp of
Yeah.
something big in Q1 of 2020, and then it all fell apart for them. I got a story about that too. I won't go into it, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Crazy. Yep. So Smart was a sidebar passion project. So I built that brand. I was passionate about that brand, and I learned a lot. Now, on the way, I will tell you, I have built multiple technology plays, like multiple. I built a platform called jobjar.com. I built a chat app, sports chat app called Chirp. I built a read me a story app called Lunaby. So I had a lot of experience in building passion projects, lots of them. So, and I always built them on the side because I needed to be doing my day thing. So I did my day thing, and then I would build all these projects because I thought it's really important for me to stay on the right side of technology. I'm getting older. I need to understand how to play in that space, even though it freaks people out. When I walk in the room, when I used to walk in the room to talk to investors about smart or to talk to potential channel partners, I would come in the room and people would be like, "Wait a second, what? Really? What? You're the CMO?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, like an anomaly, but hey, there's a lot of us. There's a lot of us, women in tech and older women in tech, and yeah." So Smart was a passion project, and we launched in April of 2020. Didn't really launch because trust structuring and the trust space is a face to face. So we delayed it by about 2 years. And I'm not even gonna go into the lessons learned. Here's the lesson. Don't build a Maserati that you can't afford to put gas in. We way overbuilt. We
Very good lesson.
spent so much money on development that we had no money left for customer acquisition. None. And that's what killed us. So we're just in the process of selling the IP for Smart to a very large technology company, and we will make enough to pay back the investors and all those years of my life I put into Smart. It was a good ride, and I learned a lot, but I won't see anything out of it. So it is what it is.
Let's bring
But
everything full
classic.
circle.
Yeah.
Let's bring everything full circle. ReBoot Consulting Group, where did the idea come from?
So I knew I wanted to work with clients who were at a crossroads. I wanted to work with clients who were faced with growth problems, or startups, or clients who had reached a crossroads and wanted to be in transition. That's where ReBoot was born. So ReBoot, want to reboot their. A lot of people at the beginning were like, that's a technology name. I'm like, bug off.
Jeez.
whatever, and it's a computer company. Anyway, so I either worked with startups or I worked with companies in transition looking to grow, that next growth curve. And so I started working. I had a really good Rolodex. I've never advertised. My clients come to me because of all the years that I've spent, working in the agency world and working internationally. And so, and I have a lot of repeat clients. And so they come to me for brand strategy, for new market development strategy, for sometimes a business strategy. And so ReBoot, that's where ReBoot was born. And then last fall, I launched a new agency called Clio, incubated it under ReBoot. And Clio is a growth strategies agency. And we are two halves of a whole, my partner and I. I do upfront business and brand strategy. She does the back end growth strategy. She's a certified OBM, online business manager, a certified AI persona specialist. She's a certified digital marketer. She is like a black belt in actually building tech stacks, building funnel marketing strategies, client acquisition strategies. So we're two halves of a whole now. And we launched Clio last October, really quietly, under the ReBoot name, and it is now taken off like crazy. So we do the brand strategy, business strategy, we tweak that, level up the foundation, and then we go into building a funnel strategy and the MarTech strategy, growth strategies. And we're working with a couple of clients that want to build passive income, but don't want to do it in a skeezy, buy my course kind of way, which we didn't want to do. And it's amazing how much it's taken off. So yeah, so at this age, I'm now back in agency land, because ReBoot's a consulting group, but Clio's an agency.
But you're also back in academia as well, too. You've gone back to your alma mater to teach. So you're teaching at the RTA program. You're back there.
Well, I was.
You were. Okay, so you're not doing it anymore.
Yep.
You were.
Not doing anymore, but I'm lecturing at Morset Institute for Entrepreneurship. So I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Ivy.
That's right, yes.
And then I got asked to teach this year. I started lecturing at Morset. And it's so much fun. Because, I was a visiting professor for 5 years at Ryerson in RTA, which is a blast to go back to your alma mater. But
how different was the program from when you had taken it?
No different. That's a scary thing. I sat on the curriculum committee too when I was teaching there, when I was a visiting professor. Not different enough. The good news is now it's really, really different, which is good. It's now the Rogers Communication Center, and it houses all kind of different media studies and communications degrees. When I was teaching, the Rogers Center had just come on, but the curriculum in RTA had not it hadn't advanced. So I sat on the curriculum committee, and they were going to make a lot of changes during my time there, which they did, which was good. I taught PR, and then a really good friend of mine I went to Ryerson with, he taught marketing, and occasionally we would swap, which was a lot of fun. And it was a course I didn't get taught, and I should have been taught when I was there the first time around. It was kind of a throwaway course. Now, when I was there, it became a real centerpiece of a course, because there's not a lot of broadcast jobs in Canada, and so many students will graduate and go into the Marcom space, and they needed that background. So I'm teaching, I'm lecturing at Morset. It's great fun. These are all young entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs, and then being an entrepreneur in residence is interesting. Some things change a lot and some things don't change. But it's good. It's good to be reconnected.
Kerry, this has been a fantastic chat. Before we jump into rapid fire questions, if anyone watching this wants to get in touch with you to learn more about what you're doing at ReBoot, how can they get a hold of you?
The best way to do that is find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. Just send me a quick note saying, I'd love to chat, and I promise to answer. So I'm on LinkedIn, and you can you might be amused by some of my posts because they're blunt.
We need more honesty.
About 2 months ago. Yeah, I wrote one about 2 months ago on HBC and the decline of the HBC brand, and now everything's come to pass. It was pretty blunt. It was so blunt that I got creeped by like 30 HBC senior people
Well, give us a
wanting to
taste,
know who is
okay?
this woman.
Give us a taste. What did you say?
Well, my question was like, how could you, Richard Baker, and you, Liz Rodbell, do this to a legacy brand? Put it out of its misery. Why are you subjecting us to death by a thousand cuts? Richard Richard Baker took all of the assets out of HBC to fund his purchase of Neiman Marcus, which was
Mm.
appalling. I mean, well within his purview. It's a privately held company by him. But you know what? To be so tone deaf, like read the room. This is a legacy brand. Just close it. And escalators don't work, and the digital presence is for crap, and all the brands that made the Bay good, like they ran it into the ground, and it didn't need to be run into the ground. They could have sold it while it was healthy. They could have said, you know what, we're not interested in this anymore, hand it off to somebody. So I was really vocal about that, really brutal. And I said, and I listed all the ways the D2C component was so bad. And there's like 40 people in their digital marketing group. And Liz Rodbell, who's this, I started off with a quote that Richard Baker said about Liz Rodbell. How about she's a retail wonderkin and she's so going to be fabulous in this job. And I just said, yeah, not so much Liz Rodbell, who lives in New York and who probably hasn't spent more than 3 days. You can see I get like I
You're very
hate it when
passionate
that
about
happens to
this.
a brand. Very passionate about brands. And so I read about brands, and I read about brands that misfire. Before that, I wrote about the Jaguar rebrand,
God, that
which was
uh,
also, yeah,
I'm a big car guy, so I could go on. I was
yeah.
having a good spirited conversation on LinkedIn with I think David Brown. He's the host of Business Wars, the Wondery podcast, and
Uh-huh.
he was talking about
Yeah.
reinventing Lincoln. And I'm like, yeah, this is what they need to do because Lincoln is a airport taxi brand now.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the pizzazz
Yeah,
that
it
it
is.
did 40, 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Going
Yeah.
back to the Hudson Bay thing, here's what I'm interested in. What's going to happen with all of that mall real estate? Like the closest Hudson Bay to me is at Sherway
Mm-hmm.
Gardens. And
Uh-huh.
that's gone. Apparently, Simons is moving into where Nordstrom is.
Mm-hmm.
Fifth
Yeah.
Avenue is only open from 12 to 6. I can't see that lasting much
Yeah.
longer.
Nope.
It, and
Nope.
it
They'll
looks like
close it.
Sport Check is actually leaving the mall. They haven't really announced
Uh-huh.
it, but a new Sport Check location across the street in a strip mall, not a strip mall, but one of the more outdoor malls, has just kind of
Uh-huh.
appeared. So it's like there's going to be a lot of real estate. And I know a lot of people want to talk about reinventing things, but then I look at a mall like Cloverdale Mall that had Target as its anchor.
Uh-huh.
There's still nothing there. That was like
Yeah.
8 years ago.
Yeah, we are not going to see old model shopping malls anymore. We're just not going
I
to
can,
see them. I worked on Sherway when I was at Promenade. They were a client of ours. I worked on Sherway. That was a golden age of shopping malls. So I was in China on business last December, and I went to what I'm going to call the most unbelievable shopping mall in Shenzhen. It's the world's largest shopping mall. Interestingly enough, the woman who owns that Shenzhen shopping mall, it's part of the chain of shopping malls in China, is actually interested in buying the Bay. She lives in Vancouver. She's a billionaire, and she's super interested in buying the Bay. What an interesting story that will be if she can acquire that asset. Now, that's going to be a tough one to rehabilitate and rebuild the brand because it needs you need to take it apart, but you need to understand, what are the brand assets you can move forward? What's the brand elasticity? How can you make it into a new model shopping experience? What do consumers want? There has to be a strong D2C presence, but you have to make it a destination. That's what's happened in Shenzhen. It's a destination. It's like nothing you've ever seen. You know, we think that we did well with West Edmonton Mall, the Gurmesian family. This shopping mall in China is like nothing you've ever seen. So shopping malls, that real estate needs to become a destination again, but a new model destination. So we're looking at a blue ocean for, for shopping malls, and that's going to take some time. It's also going to take a completely revamped brand strategy to do that, because I call it emotional cement. The emotional cement between the brand, the HBC brand, and the end user, the customer, the consumer, is really strong, even though they haven't gone there. So HBC now is becoming a love mark of a brand. And there's immense power in that being a love mark. So, it's a really interesting discussion, what the potential is for that brand going forward.
We'll have to wait and see what happens to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, LinkedIn, that's the best way to connect with me. And then I'm happy to chat.
Fantastic. All right, you ready for rapid fire questions?
I am.
Okay, the campaign you are most proud of.
Reme Modern. It's a contemporary 550,000 square foot contemporary art museum in Saskatoon. Incredible effort in a city that you would not expect to find something that amazing. And I built that brand from the ground up, along with the CEO and the board.
Your favorite movie.
Gone with the Wind. As hokey as that sounds, Gone with the Wind.
It is not hokey at all. If
Mm.
Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
Kate Winslet. I like Kate Winslet. I don't know. I'd like to think that we have a lot of shared attributes. I'd like to think that.
And if Hollywood were to make that movie starring Kate Winslet about your life, what would you call it?
Not so much. This is a phrase I use a lot. People know me, they know my Kerryisms, and I would say, not so much.
Your favorite book?
Canadian author. The book's called A Fine Balance. Canadian author. His name is Rohit Mistry. He's an amazing writer. Came out like easy 25 years ago.
Your favorite song?
This is a tough one. So I'm going to say Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Big Meatloaf fan. Pivotal moment in my teen years. Know every word, can sing it like start to finish.
The best advice you have ever received?
Let go of the doc. Let go of the doc. Let go of the outcome. Let go of the doc and just go with the flow. Good advice.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would you say?
I would tell my younger self, don't sweat the small stuff so much. Don't sweat it. This too shall pass. Don't sweat it.
My signature closing question: if you weren't in media and marketing, what would you be doing and why?
I would want to be a stand-up comedian.
Nice.
It sounds really weird. I would want to be a stand-up comedian, and I frequently get to exercise a little bit of that muscle when I speak. And I really, you know what? That's like the best job in the world.
And we're going to end things right here. Kerry, thank you so much for
Perfect.
stopping by. And thank you so much for being generous with your time. This was a wonderful chat.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Victor. This was so much fun. Have a good one.